Hello, my name is Matthew Hunter with Legacy Wilderness Academy, and I'm on a mission to document every edible and medicinal plant of the southeastern U.S. so Southerners can have greater access to nutritious food and free medicine. In this video, we're going to be looking at a common plant I think everyone should know about, the goldenrod. And goldenrod is a plant that anyone in the United States is going to have growing next to them. So it's available pretty much in the lower 48, any state in the lower 48. And so I think people should know about it. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the medicinal uses of goldenrod, how to identify the plant, and I'll also be talking about how to prepare the plant. Stick with me. Before we get started, I'll quickly mention that if after this video you want to learn more about medicinal plants of the Southeast, make sure to check out my online course called Medicinal Plants of the Southeast, which you can find in the link in the description below this video. Goldenrods are a large group of plants in the sunflower family. They're in the genus Solidago, and the species in my area usually flower around late summer. So there are something like 60 or 70 species in the United States, and they can all be used similarly. You don't have to identify each one to the species, but you do want to make sure that it is a goldenrod, because there are some other similar looking plants called ragworts that are toxic. I don't have any of those in my area to show you. The only ones in my area I know of show up around the spring, so they don't flower at the same time. But there are a lot of different types of ragworts as well. So you may have some in your area that flower at the same time as goldenrod. So keep that in mind. But I'll show you how to identify a goldenrod and sort of separate it from just about anything else. So one of the distinct things about the goldenrods in my area and many species of goldenrod is how tall they are. You can see these ones above me are about 7 feet tall. So they do get really tall. Now you'll notice that right next to this goldenrod there is the stalk of last year's plant. So these species here are perennial, which means they live on from the roots, and so the stalk will die up above ground part, but then it'll come back every year from the same roots. And you'll notice here, if you look at the dead stalks, they have this sort of fluffy seed pods. Kind of reminds you of a dandelion because it is in that same greater aster family. And so that's how to identify the plant when it's old. And you can actually learn how to recognize these dead stalks just by their sort of branching pattern, because you'll notice that the flower stalks have this sort of drooping appearance. And if you look at each cluster, there's like a lot of, it's like almost like a tree shape here. You can see that, how it looks kind of like a tree, maybe almost like a Christmas tree type of shape at the top. And these little drooping flower clusters, the flowers are mostly coming off of the top. You'll see on the bottom there's not a lot coming off, so they mostly all just kind of face upward there. Maybe I'm struggling to explain it perfectly, but you can see with your own eyes there is a distinct shape there that we're looking at. So that shape really comes through in the dead stalks as well. So you can identify this plant and find a bunch of dead stalks like in the winter and fall, and then you can come back to it the next year and you'll know where to find the goldenrod. The leaves of goldenrod are somewhat long, almost sort of willow shaped. And if you look closely, they have a couple secondary veins that branch off a couple inches away from the base of the leaf. And it's really easy to see from the back part of the leaf. But and the larger goldenrods, that's one of the ways that I learned how to recognize it without flowers early on, was by those couple little secondary veins that branch off, and there's sort of a distinct feature there. And then lastly, another feature of goldenrod leaves is that they have a rough, sandpapery texture. There are a lot of different medicinal uses we could talk about when it comes to goldenrod, but to keep things simple and to not overwhelm you all, I'm going to stick with just 3 of the main uses of goldenrod where you're going to get, I think, the most benefit. But before we talk about that, let's talk about sort of an overview of how this plant interacts with the body. So this plant is going to be a mucosal tonic, or a mucous membrane strengthener. And I really like the way that Corey Pine Shane explains it in his book on medicinal plants of the Southeast. He says that usually when we think of the immune system, we think of antibodies and white blood cells and maybe the lymph system. But the very first line of defense in the immune system is the mucosa, that sort of barrier inside the body that acts as a first line of defense, right? And so this plant is going to sort of strengthen the mucosa, and what it's going to do is it's going to tighten it and tone it, And the way he explains it in his book is that it acts as a sort of fly trap that's going to catch bad guys trying to come into our body and invade our body, and it's going to help eliminate them and be that first little barrier for the immune system. So a really good explanation. But this is a plant that is an astringent, so it tightens tissues and it tightens and tones those mucous membranes. There are three primary areas where this toning of the mucosa or mucous membranes is usually applied when we're using goldenrod. And if you remember these three areas, you'll have a really good grasp on how to use goldenrod as a medicine. So the three areas of the body where it's usually applied is the urinary tract, the respiratory tract, and the skin. So first, let's start with the urinary tract. So goldenrod is a go-to plant for the kidneys, bladder, and urethra. It is an anti-inflammatory for the urinary tract. So it's used for kidney or bladder inflammation. It's used for things like urinary tract infections. And there's some debates as to whether or not this plant is actually an antiseptic or actually acts against the bacteria that may cause a urinary tract infection. But regardless of whether or not it's technically antiseptic, it is considered by most herbalists to be antiseptic because it tightens those mucous membranes, tones the tissue, and it's also a diuretic, so it helps flush out those harmful bacteria and sort of clean out the urinary tract when there is an infection. It's also used for bladder infections. It's used for kidney pain, and so any type of pain or inflammation in the urinary tract, goldenrod is going to be an excellent plant for that. Some herbalists have said that it can be used to help pass a kidney stone, while other herbalists disagree and say that it's a little bit too stimulating to the kidney to be used in that acute sort of situation of passing a kidney stone. And so some herbalists really recommend that you use it after a kidney stone has been passed to help reduce the inflammation and help avoid the the recurrence of more kidney stones later in the future. So it's a really good sort of tonic for the urinary system. It's also used for urinary retention, which is when a person is unable to completely empty their bladder. And so lastly, on this sort of urinary tract tonic action, this plant has also been used as a sort of energizer or a stamina booster or a plant that will sort of build the system, okay? And so this use has been attributed to its effect on the kidneys. It is a plant that sort of stimulates a deficient kidney. So if your kidney function is deficient, this is a plant that's going to stimulate that. And what is one of the symptoms of a deficient kidney is constant fatigue and exhaustion. So this plant has been used for people who are just run down, fatigued, maybe overworked, or their kidneys are just not quite functioning properly, and it's causing them to have maybe a little bit of lower back pain associated with it, some tired feet, or they climb up a flight of stairs and they're just exhausted. No matter how much sleep they get, they're always exhausted, no matter how much coffee they drink. This is a plant that is used to help rebuild stamina. And that's not one of the uses that's super commonly talked about, but it is sort of attributed to this use for toning the kidneys and helping actually stimulate the kidneys to sort of wake up and be able to do their job. And so this plant has been used as a sort of stamina booster and energizing plant. Next up is the respiratory tract. So goldenrod is one of the top plants to use for allergy symptoms like watery eyes, itchy, runny nose, sneezing, and sinus congestion. It's also really good to use against pet allergies as well. And this may come as a surprise to most people because a lot of people think that goldenrod is what is causing their seasonal allergies. But in fact, it's very unlikely that goldenrod pollen is causing your allergies because it is a plant that has really heavy pollen. So goldenrod is insect pollinated, which means that it doesn't really produce a lot of pollen and it doesn't get dispersed into the wind. It really just falls to the ground for the most part. But the reason people think that is because ragweed is flowering around the same time as goldenrod. And so people see the goldenrod, they start getting allergies and they think that that's the cause. But in reality, it's probably the ragweed, which has green flowers that are not super noticeable, okay? And so this plant is really good at sort of drying up excess mucus. So if you have a runny nose, it's really good at drying it up. If you have a bunch of catarrh or phlegm in your lungs, it's good at drying that up as well. So it's what would be called an anti-catarrhal, and I've defined that in previous videos. We'll talk about that here in a second. And so for that reason, it's really good for treating sinus infections, okay? And so because we talked about it maybe not being so much of an actual antimicrobial or antiseptic, you would probably want to mix goldenrod with an antimicrobial plant for sinus infections like the bee balm or horse mint that I just talked about in a previous video. The third primary use of goldenrod is for healing wounds on the skin. So if you research the Native American uses of goldenrod, you will find that the historical record is absolutely replete with references of healing all types of wounds, from burns to ulcers to sores, skin irritations, all types of different wounds. Goldenrod is an astringent and it's an anti-inflammatory, so it's going to tighten and tone the tissues and aid the body in healing itself. So an excellent plant for that purpose. And for that, it can be used as a wash. So you can just take the tea and rub it on, or a liniment where you soak a cloth in some of the warm tea and apply it, or also as a salve. Okay, so excellent for that purpose. And also sores that are more internal. So it has been used for sores of the mouth and also as a gargle for sore throat. And so as we sort of wrap up this section on medicinal uses, I want to talk about the herbal actions of the plants, okay? And so you will often see herbal actions listed with plants in books. When you're reading like a chapter on a medicinal plant, you'll see the herbal actions at the top. And that can be kind of confusing if you don't really know what they mean. And so now that we've really talked about how to use this plant, how it tones the mucous membranes, how it tightens tissues, let's talk about 3 of the primary herbal actions of goldenrod. They are astringent, anti-catarrhal, and anti-inflammatory. So astringent means that it tightens the tissues. Astringency is like when you bite into a green apple and you feel that tightness in your mouth. That is astringency. Of course, anti-inflammatory, we all know what that means. And by reducing inflammation in the respiratory tract, in the urinary tract, and of course, topically on the skin, we are aiding the body's ability to heal itself. So reducing that inflammation means the body is able to heal itself more effectively. And then of course, anti-catarrhal, which I mentioned briefly. That catarrh is sort of an older term. Not a lot of people in the US really use that term, but it's the phlegm or that mucus. So the catarrh could be in our lungs, the phlegm we want to loosen and expel, or the sinus congestion. So it's anti-catarrhal. So those are some of the herbal actions. Now, when you see those herbal actions in chapters and books on medicinal plants, you'll know a little bit more of what they mean. Of course, the fourth one I forgot to mention, a diuretic. That's also an herbal action that most of us are familiar with. All right, so as far as which parts of the goldenrod are used, the whole plant is medicinally active. So you can use the flowers, the leaves, or the roots. And oftentimes, whenever you look at the Native American records, you'll see that the roots were preferred. However, in the modern day, most herbalists will use the flowers, and specifically the pollen inside the flowers is considered the sort of the strongest part medicinally speaking. And so you'll often see the recommendation to try to harvest the flowers when only some of them have opened. So you're aiming here for about 30% of the flowers being opened, which means that the rest of the flowers, the other 70%, are unopened, and so they're just beginning to form. They have a lot of that medicinal activity, the pollen still in them. And so what we're going to do is just clip these off, and you can dry these out and use these for tea. So you can make a simple infusion with them, and you can also make a tincture. Okay, and the tincture is probably going to be the strongest if you're using it for allergy symptoms or congestion. And so yeah, so it's a really easy plant to use and get to know. So we're just going to be harvesting these, and I've shown how to make tinctures in a lot of my previous videos. And today we're going to be mixing these with ragweed leaves. And you may be thinking, why would you be doing that, Matthew? Well, if you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that the ragweed pollen is allergenic. However, if you harvest the leaves of ragweed before the flowers appear, the leaves are an antihistamine and a very effective antihistamine. And so ragweed and goldenrod, the two plants that people think are giving them the worst allergies, well, the ragweed really is, of course, are actually the plants that are going to be treating our allergy symptoms. And so next we'll look at how to make a tincture with ragweed and goldenrod. Okay, so I have here a ragweed tincture that I made in a previous video, and the way we made this was just putting the fresh plant in the jar and then filling all the way to the top with Everclear. So that's 95% or 190 proof pure grain alcohol. Now it's been sitting here for at least a couple weeks. So I'll go ahead and strain that through my handy dandy nut milk bag. And like I said, this is an excellent antihistamine. Okay, and I'll squeeze the rest of that out later, but here's the ragweed tincture. And then here I have a goldenrod tincture. You can see I just used the jars, whatever jar I have laying around my house. This is from last year. Made it using the same exact method. So what I'm going to do today is combine it 50-50 to make a tincture for seasonal allergy symptoms. So I have my little funnel here, and I'll go ahead and fill this half the way up. Okay. Then I'll go ahead and take my goldenrod tincture here. And this is how I make little herbal formulas. This isn't a real true formula, it's just mixing two plants together. Nothing special. And we'll go ahead and fill it up with goldenrod. So now we have the antihistamine effects of both plants together. There we go. And the dosage for something like this, for me personally, would be about 30 to 60 drops as needed. So that would be multiple times a day. So there you go. There's my ragweed goldenrod tincture, something that most people would probably think you're crazy for having, but this is going to be very effective at helping congestion, those itchy, watery eyes, sneezing, all those hay fever symptoms during allergy season. Lastly, we'll talk about safety concerns. So you remember me mentioning that goldenrod is a diuretic, so you do want to keep that in mind if that's going to be an issue for you. And some people may actually be allergic to goldenrod if you are allergic to other plants in the aster family. So for example, if you drink chamomile tea and you have a bad reaction to it, you would probably also have a bad reaction to this plant, but for most people, it shouldn't be a problem. Also keep in mind there is a poisonous lookalike associated with goldenrod. I don't think a lot of people are going to make that mistake, but it is possible. So the ragworts you do want to be aware of. And then the very last thing I'll mention is make sure to only harvest goldenrod leaves that look really healthy and don't have any type of mold or mildew on them. That could be a concern as well. Okay. Well guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video on the medicinal uses of goldenrod. Again, my name is Matthew Hunter with Legacy Wilderness Academy, and if you want to learn more about medicinal plants of the Southeast, make sure to check out my online course in the link in the description below, and also make sure to check out a few of my other videos. How'd you like that? Y'all have a good day.